Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AIQRATE Webinar Specials CX4 series. Today we have Dr.Ambica Rajagopal with us to discuss on the topic Reimagine Industry 4.0 with AI, the factory of the future. This session will be moderated by Dhanrajani, CEO and co-founder, AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting. Before the session, some housekeeping rules for smooth flow of the webinar. Request all to be on mute to ensure no interruptions. Leave your questions in the chat window for us to take them up for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and you can check the playback video on our website, www.aiqrate.ai. Now I would like to introduce Ambica. Dr. Ambica Rajagopal is Chief Analytics Officer at Sterlite Technologies. In this role, Ambica is a thought partner to the CEO and Executive Committee of STL in making STL a data-driven and analytics-driven organization. Under her leadership, machine learning and AI technologies have been widely applied in manufacturing excellence, R&D, and sales and marketing, with several AI systems in production, resulting in efficiency gains, dollar savings, and deeper understanding of processes. Ambica's prior engagement was as Global Data Science Director, Advanced Analytics at Cummins Incorporations, where she led a team of data scientists and data engineers in delivering over $100 million in projected operational efficiency savings via enterprise-level quality analytics platforms. Prior to that, Ambica started and led a data science team as Director, Data Science at Fidelity Investments, supporting the global portfolio management, trading, and compliance teams. Dr. Ambica Rajagopal has a PhD in mathematics from Purdue University and an MSc in mathematics from BITS Pilani. Ambica, thanks for making time to be with us in our CX4 series webinar specials today. I'll now hand over the session to Samir. Samir, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, NK, for the introductions. Ambica, pleasure to have you at our AIQRATE webinar specials. Must say, the profile is impressive. And absolutely, I think it calls for a great session, what I am sure our participants are waiting for. Just to kickstart, Ambica, I think the theme per se is very topical, specifically in the rhetoric and this whole contemporary news filtering in terms of economic impairment, the whole aspect about manufacturing going through a kind of a lean period. But the fact is the significance of manufacturing within Indian context and even global context cannot be ignored. Specifically about India, we're talking about 16% of the GDP contribution coming from this segment and 14% of employment. So it's a whopping kind of a, let's say, number. But more important, I think through this discussion, we would like to pick up the nuggets of wisdom and insights, what you've gathered while working with these marquee organizations, and would also like to take some prescriptive approaches around what you suggest in terms of this whole aspect of artificial intelligence really penetrating the whole value chain of manufacturing. Just to kind of get some of these initial things going, let me ask you, one of the facets about manufacturing as an industry segment has been, it's been late into adopting artificial intelligence and new age technologies. What was the reason? In fact, was there something more around kind of, let's say, the inertia, more reluctance, or kind of issues at the management level, and I'm saying generically, or you believe there were some other factors which led to kind of, let's say, late adoption of manufacturing, taking into account the whole exponential technologies and artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So first of all, I think good evening to everybody. Thank you, Samir and NK and AIQRATE for having me on this panel. Excited to be here. So I've spent my 20 years of career thinking about quantitative modeling, how to tackle business problems for business, for efficiencies, for outsize, results, and just a completely different way of solving business problems. And last 4 5 years, I should say by providence more than design, I've come into manufacturing, and somehow it is I've kind of really jived with it. I love being part of the manufacturing industry. I love going to plants, understanding how things work, looking at impact on physical processes, and it's really a very before this my experience was in banking. So I think and it's something, and particularly this topic of machine learning and AI, which is something that I am passionate about, being a mathematician, being a technologist. It's particularly in manufacturing. It is something that has that I'm very passionate about. So thank you for giving me the forum to be able to talk about this. So coming to your question, Samir. So it's very interesting. I think it's there's a kind of almost a dissonance. If you sit kind of where I sit, there's all this excitement and all these results appear to be coming out, and all of this hype about AI, and knowing it, and having been with this discipline for so long, I know that the power that is there. But as you say, the adoption in the manufacturing industry has been slow. So here are my 3 thoughts around it. One is certainly, as you said, there is a people aspect to it, in the sense that what we like to call more traditional industries, which I will say, industries that are sort of not, that have relied more on, the art of doing something, or the, craft of, even on a manufacturing floor, there is craft involved, and just knowing that it's right, things like that. These industries introducing change, and particularly the kind of intelligent automation we're talking about is a different. It does take a little bit more time, but honestly, my experience is this is the case across the board. Even at premier banking institutions, people are people, and everyone is resistant to change. And what I always say is that every time we pick up a project, factoring this in, that the fact that ultimately somebody has to trust you enough to change the way they work. So the building out to this is important, but certainly this mindset is certainly at play here. The second thing is, I think, the systems and the data that is actually set up in manufacturing, in plants in particular, but also, because these are not companies that are born digital, as it were, they, even from their supply chain, from their logistic, from their sales engine, the data tends not to be of the greatest quality. And even if it is collected, probably when machines were set up, these are the data collection mechanism goes in, but the deep thought as to how exactly this data is going to be used, and designing these data collection mechanisms in such a way that this data is actually useful. I think this is there is a curve of maturity there. So this is also, kind of led to this delay. And the third reason I would say is, and of course, the advent of IoT, which we'll talk about it in a little bit. We've been hearing about industrial IoT for a while. Why hasn't that turbocharged, and solved this sort of data collection problem? We'll talk about that in a bit here. But certainly, the data itself and the quality of the data itself continues to be a significant problem. The third one I would say is, and this is almost more technical. If you look at where the sort of leaps and bounds advances that have happened in AI have really been in places where there is a great deal of data. It looks at the places like retail, places like image recognition, where there is actually, it is a data-rich problem. It is a problem that is that is sort of one sort of knows what the answers even look like. You have good labels. You sort of as human beings, given it in a small scale, we're able to understand what the answer should be. That is simply not the case. If you want to essentially get into, let's say, predictive maintenance, you want to understand, what is it that's leading to process drift, a manufacturing process to drift from its, let's say, 2 sigmas out. This is not an answer that is known. And not only that, these are not data sets. Even when they are of good quality, you're not going to get, volumes and volumes of data like you are, let's say, pixels in an image. And because AI has, deep learning has sort of kind of, just shot out of the door as sort of the first, and in the form that deep learning is today, sort of technology taken off. There is a, I would say, a gap even in the research, even in literature, in understanding of how do we bring these techniques to smaller data sets? How do we bring these techniques to more exploratory problems? How do they bring these techniques to problems that are don't look the same? I mean, you can't easily find for image recognition. You can, in some sense, all image recognition problems look similar. And it's not, and there is research. This is something that everybody from all the eminent ML researchers and deep learning researchers recognize that this is an area where thought needs to go in, research needs to go in, because the next jump is expected to be in places like manufacturing, like healthcare, like supply chains. I've had the pleasure of doing several things in these areas to solve these kind of problems, coming up with techniques, coming up with solutions. But again, that is less well known, again contributing to this delay.
So, and you said 3 wonderful things about this whole aspect about the late adoption of AI into manufacturing, and coupled with, of course, new age technology. I want to pick up 2 of them. One is you've talked about data sets, and we want to do a more kind of a deep dive, because banking, insurance, retail, CPG, these are the industries which have been earlier adopters. There are those benchmarks available, and it's very easy to kind of compare data sets, insights, and also algorithmic kind of best practices. Now, as a practitioner who have done multiple projects in manufacturing on the AI side, how's been your experience? And this grappling of this data set problem being disparate, how have you looked at from your lens, and what are the few best practices you would like to suggest, please?
Yeah, sure. I think so. One is, I think the first and foremost, coming out of the gate to sort of put aside this mindset that you need let's say at least is simply unlikely to happen, and the fact that you and the thought process that you actually need these kind of data sets in order to be able to have a business impact. I think that's putting that aside as a practitioner at the first step. I think that's that's really critical. Second is, I think, reorienting yourself. I mean, it is easy, and particularly, I think, the younger folks, there's a lot of excitement. Everybody wants to do TensorFlow and all of these things, but having the teams actually reach beyond, reach back into the literature, reach into, go back and look about, whether it is through journals, through papers, through conferences, through even on Kaggle, look at how people have sort of gone back to first principles of how these algorithms work, and actually find tweaks that will make them work for smaller. I think this is very, very important, and ultimately the coolest thing is to have a positive business outcome. So it's the coolest thing is not to build a complex architecture model. The coolest thing is to actually have that business outcome, to actually predict out, say that this that a particular fault is happening, identify those faulty machines, take them out of circulation, and actually see the occurrence rate drop. In reality, out there in the field, which we had the pleasure to do, couple of times. Yeah.
The challenge I have heard and would love to take your inputs on this. Manufacturing systems, as you said, have been a bit archaic in terms of some of these legacy application maintenance and all. Now the systems don't talk to each other, the data sets are disparate, and then we want to implement the best of the AI techniques, tools and all. What's your suggestion on this? What's the view for you?
And that is what I was coming to. And the third I would say is it takes a little bit, to understand how robust. See, we hear it theoretically that that ML algorithms are simply because of the way they're constructed, that they are robust to a particular amount of noise. Okay, so but exactly as you said, you can. It takes a little bit to an experience and trust to actually see that this works. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So you could have a case where in my current organization, we built out an algorithm and an ML model where honestly it was a very small data set, and we knew at the outset that it is not going to capture because of the we first and foremost we have to stitch together the data from from the machines, from the lake, from the machines, from Oracle, from all of these disparate systems, which is of course why how data lakes should be constructed and what is the role that they actually play is really critical, because this you're building a asset for the business in this case. And when we built this model, we knew from the outset that we are essentially going to capture about 20% of the failures that we were going after, but they were the high impact ones. Now, being comfortable, see, in a case where, and this is why I was relating back to, let's say in FMCG or in image recognition and so on, you're talking about accuracy rates well into the 90s, above 90% and things like that. But when you're actually in a manufacturing floor, what you're trying to do is you're trying to essentially squeeze the outliers. So essentially everything that sort of falls outside a particular, falls outside the quality norms, it's a Six Sigma process of essentially gradually squeezing that. And if you look at it from that perspective, you become tolerant of more noise in your data. You become more tolerant of having lower levels of accuracy, and it works. So and again, we can go back to the data point, and from the data perspective, I think this is a place where enterprises have if you look at it from the point of view of enterprises, there is in my opinion, a gaping hole in the ecosystem. If you look at it from the point of view of Microsoft Azure or from the point of view of cloud, the partner ecosystem looks very rich because there are a lot of people providing IoT solutions, there are a lot of people providing there's SAP, there's Salesforce and so on. But if you look at it from the point of view of an enterprise, let's say I want to understand I want to understand what is it which quality spill should I look at the current moment. Now, this suddenly begins to cross various enterprise applications. It is the machine data that is probably belonging to some proprietor, or it is IoT data that is coming out from IoT devices that you've deployed. But it is also maybe your SAP data, because maybe that's where, or Oracle or wherever it is, where your quality records reside, and and then your customer system may be completely something else. Your customer track orders, all that may be in Salesforce. So from a customer ecosystem, from an enterprise point of view, there is a gap in the partner ecosystem that actually pulls all of these pieces together and builds solutions on top of it.
Great.
And this is something,
So that's a relevant point you touch. And from here on, if I extend, Ambika, I'll take two questions, but at, I would say, let's say, two dimensions. One is going to the brass tack, AI in manufacturing. Let's pick up the value chain. I mean, I think all of us understand effectiveness, efficiency, but seen that all. First, let's see, and maybe let's try to take the whole value chain of a manufacturer. Tell us where all the interventions of AI stands today. And in the second question, what I'll say, okay, now take a kind of a, let's say, future forward view, factory of the future, but we'll come to that. But more importantly, current situation, AI in manufacturing, let's kind of dissect the value chain and please tell us what exactly AI does over there.
Yeah, broadly, I like to classify AI, what AI can do into two broad groups, and we'll talk about how it fits into, because these are very different in terms of thought process, and we'll talk about how it fits into manufacturing in both cases. So one is this whole, what I spoke about as intelligent automation. So these are tasks where, sort of we know the answer. If you give me a widget that is manufactured off the line, I can visually inspect it and I can sort of say, yes, this works or doesn't work, or I can essentially have a machine that, does that for me. So we know the answer. And what we're looking for, and if there is an art and a craft involved in there, what we're looking for is a system that completely automates it. Right, so this is sort of the intelligent automation part of it. Now, for this particular case, I mean, for manufacturing companies, it really completely runs the gamut. I would say any place where you have a sort of subject matter expert that's actually and it could be a person on the line, it could be the CFO, taking a judgment call, and so this goes all the way from from your raw materials coming in, your inspections of your raw materials, because many times, your issues are actually traced back to your suppliers. So inspection of your raw materials on the way in, connecting up your raw material data all the way through your production line up to your, quality, to essentially have a check that's constantly running to see whether, there's anything that's blipping up that you need to take care of. Having an automated engine actually looking at that completely. Supplier risk, of course, is across all industries, but particularly so for manufacturing, particularly where we sit today, very relevant. And then I would say, of course, in your line itself, able to predict out what issues there might be at some place, bringing in recommendations. Of course, there's the whole idea of fail fast, which is a very, very interesting concept to think about it. One thinks of it as, preventative maintenance, but really if you extend it even further, one is having the machines fail, but the other is in your line. Let's say you're essentially producing widgets. Now, if a widget that in stage A, widget is going to fail in stage C, you should fail it right there, because that's that is an enormous cost saver and a very interesting way to look at things. And of course, there is your and then all the way out to your to your broader ecosystem, your demand forecasting. It's a very, very big one, because for a manufacturing plant, it goes right all the way back to your integrated business planning, your feeding into all of that. All the way to, for a company, you might even, with something we've done at STL, you might even want to think about who your investors are and who you should go after. And there are very interesting things that you can actually do using AI to essentially understand your investor universe and who they should be, who you should target, and so on. So all these fall under what I like to call as intelligent automation. We know the answers. We just would like, automating them will essentially bring us scale, will make it more fail-proof, etc. Now, the second class is something that is not as much talked about because it is harder. It is more, there are no templatized solutions by definition. The second broad, bucket of use cases are where now you're going to, where you actually use AI to augment human intelligence. So you're not looking for answers that you already know, you're looking for answers that you couldn't possibly begin to guess. Okay, so this is where, particularly for engineering, manufacturing, this is a big area, because essentially it is how it can turbocharge R&D. If you look at how manufacturing systems are set up, at any point in time, there is if you have a failure, or a quality spill, What has contributed to that quality spill is a vast variety of factors that is almost impossible to model, and certainly well beyond any human's ability to, cleverly pinpoint, unless it's a very gross issue. So if it is a very, glaringly obvious issue, then it becomes. Otherwise, there are plenty of things that sort of follow, maybe this, maybe that, and you don't really know. Machine learning algorithms, AI algorithms, particularly, when you layer on the ability to sort of what we call look inside the black box using techniques, sharp plots, LIME is a framework, a little bit less useful in this case, but sharp plots, PDPs, all these sort of techniques that allow you to sort of look inside that multidimensional model that you've built and pull out sort of correlated behavior, variables that are essentially contributing or can explain away certain areas of problems. This now becomes completely insightful to even R&D, and many times both in this both at STL as well as at Cummins, we've actually been able to come out with things that the R&D they hadn't thought about it. There were effects that they really hadn't thought about.
Because this is very interesting description what you gave, Ambika, and very relevant. In fact, we also had some of the questions streaming in on the same thing. Now, you talked about this R&D piece over there. Manufacturing plants, workplaces, and R&D today are siloed. Largely, I'm taking a scenario. And there is a way AI can truncate this time to the market of the products when they are being designed, kind of thought through, to the production stage. Any viewpoint over there, how this can be accelerated and how AI could become a Trojan horse over there?
Yeah, because see, what was, so typically this divide that I would say at this point where we live, in the place where we are today, to me, it's more of a cognitive divide than anything else, because, excuse me, typically what is thought of as in R&D is, they're not at scale and they're not in real life. So in the sense that these are trials, these are designs of experiments, they are actually looking at sort of in lab sort of circumstances. But and then actually what happens on the floor, all the way out to production is something that is subject now to n number of other vagaries, right? So your machines come into play, your, weather comes into play, maybe it is, something in the air in the factory that is, affecting the impact, affecting your, or it's a supply quality issue. None of these can actually be even thought about or envisaged in the lab. And then, putting, having thought through, and so for it to be able to cycle back, and of course all the way out to the customer, right? Because it could be something specific at the customer side that's actually introducing the defect. And what AI does is essentially truncate this entire thing, and really I would put it out to to all of you to really think about it in this way. In my opinion, as of today, there is really the question that we should be asking is, why is it that I cannot today actually click on a quality issue, set of quality issues, click on it and have an engine run at the back, collect all the data, everything that is required, everything that is relevant, and say X, Y, Z. Here are the factors. Here are how they impact. This is where your issue probably lies. I would say this is where where we are heading. This is the end state that we should sort of push the ecosystem towards. And I mean, it's doable. We've done it a few times, and it is entirely doable. And that essentially collapses that divide that you spoke about.
So, conversation around manufacturing would not be kind of complete if we don't talk about supply chain logistics. And huge changes happening, as you know, Ambika, more than many of us, in terms of new age kind of supply chain logistics startups coming in, Revigos, Blackbucks of the world. And the whole aspect about being asset light, digital heavy, and infused with AI is the norm. Now, given any kind of a size or the shape of the manufacturing segment, how do you think from a perspective of artificial intelligence influencing the supply chain logistics? And given today we know that, let's say this situation, COVID, and I'm just trying to layer this question, supply chains have been hit. There's a rethought a kind of a complete cogitation around what's the new supply chain going to be like post-COVID situation. One, I want to have your perspective about this new norm in the supply chain. Could be with AI, without AI. And second, it's how does this whole future of supply chain logistic work when we talk about linkage with AI and manufacturing setup specifically?
Yeah, so I would for a second like to pull back to your initial question, Samir. If you look at places where industries where AI has truly taken off, right? In each of these cases, the business model, new business models have come in. Right. So if you look at if you look at Uber, if you look at Amazon, all of these cases, it is an entirely new business model. And I would put it to you that AI is not going to take off in an industry, or the point at which AI will take off in an industry is when new business models centered around AI actually begin to disrupt the way things are actually done. And the reason I wanted to bring that in is because I think supply chain, particularly post this event, this huge macroeconomic event that we are going through, is I think it's going to really accelerate and produce new business models within the supply chain of logistics. And essentially, this and here I think you talked about asset light, and I would encourage you to look at asset light from the point of view of the let's say a truck manufacturer. So as a let's say so the fleet guy, the guy who's essentially owns all the trucks, or let's say Walmart or whatever, who owns all the trucks, he's going to be thinking asset light. Right? So he or she is going to be thinking asset light. Now she needs to make a decision. How do you go asset light? And this is where it essentially puts it back on the manufacturer. And so lots of manufacturers are actually thinking how that they are looking at the future and saying we're going to get to a stage where, as opposed to buying, let's say, trucks, buying machines, buying capital intensive and maintenance intensive equipment, customers are just going to rent time from us. So it is essentially a business model that's coming up there is pay per use, and AI is at the core of it. Because the moment that the entire service and maintenance of heavy equipment, of capital intensive equipment falls back to the manufacturer, suddenly the manufacturer is now left holding the bag in terms of any kind of breakdown and quality issues. So again, completely revamping the way so efficiencies will skyrocket, operational efficiencies will because again if it is a pay per use, then it becomes extremely imperative to essentially bring down the cost of operation even for an hour of a particular asset. So this is one big place where I see a disruption happening, industry driving towards this area, and AI is at the heart of it. And now the second, of course, is understanding of risk. So essentially, how risk propagates through economic networks. I think this is again something that is going to create a huge prominence, because suddenly supplier risk and the risk that you have on your supplier network that is transmitted to you has become something that's top of mind for all enterprises, including, of course, manufacturing.
Within that thing, what you mentioned, there is also what I call it a bane of manufacturing industry. There is a hub, a manufacturing plant, and then the whole spoke ecosystem, which is about suppliers, OEM kind of contractors, their propensity to really look at this technology, new age, AI, or maybe kind of IoT, seems to be kind of very, very elementary. Now, in your experience, how have you gone around and saying, look, there is an ecosystem, and once everyone is a part of the ecosystem, the whole leverageability of enjoying the benefits of these technologies are widespread. But that's more like evangelization. But from a use case perspective, do you think of some of these scenarios where the whole ecosystem has been benefited with the leverageability of AI or new age exponential technologies?
Yeah, I think there is every time. So so there are of course, telematics, IoT devices are a big part of it. The suppliers know, as well as all suppliers know that they stand to gain if they essentially cut down maintenance and downtime costs. I mean, this downtime cost is really the number one thing on everybody's mind. I think the willingness, the willingness to actually take a step in this direction is definitely there. But again, it is, the use cases have not been that many. I think uptick in the US is one where, they were Caterpillar's entity and so on. So they've had a few very successful use cases. Where Boeing is another, in the aerospace industry where, in this area, there has been a lot of, actual gains that have been done. I can talk about, a couple of, in my own experience, there was a case where, there was an issue that was happening with engines that were out in the field, so that were already gone out of the, have been sold and been out for on the streets for already, let's say, a couple of years, and it was an expensive repair, and it was 2-3 days of downtime. But what we were able to do, again, with very, very spotty data, we were actually able to predict which of those trucks were, had a high propensity of failures. So the campaign was run, was optimized towards what the algorithm and the machine what our algorithm and model actually put out, and we just didn't need to talk to several of our customers at all. We didn't even need to talk about the issue, because eventually it was clear that the model was working. But what was also interesting, so one is that it essentially proved this out to that entire ecosystem. So that entire ecosystem, because at the, Cummins was at the time where we did this work, Cummins was very vocal about it to their customers. They said, this is how we are going to do it, and you have to come along on this ride for us, because we are sure. And this is again going back to the idea, somebody has to trust your model enough to be able to do that, and in this case we were successful in doing that. But it also, and again, some of these conversations also go back to the suppliers. Because if you have it actually spreads out into everybody that the causation touches. As these use cases come out, folks become believers because they actually hear it. They hear it from you. They can actually see the business accruing. They can see that this dreaded downtime is sort of minimized, and it's a big deal.
So how receptive they have been? The reason I'm asking, because I'm trying to link with something which is a kind of a subset of this, the whole small and medium enterprises, a huge 64 million in India, and many of them today have a struggle. Yes. And one of the very often asked questions, I'm sure you have heard in many of the forums or conversation, hey, what is AI can do for us?
Yeah.
What's your thought over there? And this is purely for MSME kind of segment, Ambika.
Yeah, so I think this is I think this is an underserved underserved segment in this particular area. I think they have a lot of, because as part of Sterlite, I see that we have a lot of vendors coming to us, talking to us, and trying to, whether it mostly it is IoT vendors, IoT systems, and so on. But as I said before, I think the point is that still the perspective of the enterprise, what the enterprise itself can do, to make these gains is missing. One thing is that the proof is always in the pudding. And this is where the leadership of AI and analytics organizations within companies plays a very big role. It is extremely important how you actually phrase, pace, and put together the way that these things work. So I think the first and foremost is absorbing. First of all, is understanding that what you're doing is change management. Right. What you're doing is changing, so really, having a humble attitude, thought process. This is not an ivory tower. You're just as part of the organization as others. This really helps a lot, particularly for organizations that have probably fought their way up because you'll meet endless people, 20, 30 years experience. We've seen it go from, and you're just a new kid on the block, and, having a certain, gaining entry, making sure that you gain entry to their mind space is very important. Secondly is to understand that nothing's, honestly, you need to get results on the ground. So, putting a really ruthlessly prioritizing to a few wins. And by ruthlessly prioritizing, I do mean, putting aside data sufficiency issues, being very, very targeted in the way that you sort of look at data sufficiency issues. So at STL, the way we did it is we said, we're going to fix our data landscape in slices. So we said, we'll take a problem. Only if you give me a problem that I believe we can solve and we can have an impact with, we will essentially take a slice of the data under that and fix that and move forward so that, we have, we have these wins. And once the results start to roll in, because the MSMEs by their very nature are very nimble. They are looking to grow, and they are always, with this comes a particular nimbleness that you will see, which is much rarer to find in larger organizations. You will see a tolerance towards risk, a tolerance towards acceptance of new technologies, so long as it works. So as long as you can, sort of prove that this is the case, but where, honestly, in my opinion, the conversation gets a little bit lost is if it is, more abstract, less focused on business outcomes, more on sort of foundational and structural things like lakes and, IoT systems that are that look like, a lot of, capital investments without, talking about the business outcome. I think that's where MSMEs begin to then struggle, and, sort of it becomes much harder to lead to adoption. I hope that answers your question.
No, very true. You said the right thing. I think it's about starting small and scaling it fast and learning from all those trials and tribulations, and also ensuring that all these early success or early quick wins are kind of evangelized, well thought through, and then take it to a level which is much more kind of a mass across the enterprise. One of the thing over there now, whether it's a small and medium enterprise or manufacturing, and this is not just, I would say, a bone of contention, but for this specific segment, it's across, is this fear of automation, AI, displacing jobs. I'm sure you may have been asked this question while you have been on the shop floor, hey, is my job safe? Kind of a thing. And specifically, I think there is a very, very strong kind of, let's say, community of yesayers and naysayers around the AI aspect. And one of the naysayers kind of, let's say, community rant is always, hey, AI will displace jobs in totality. Let's hear from you. What's your view on this?
So we've my story is always the same. You just have to look not that far back into human history. There has always been, going back all the way to the Luddites, that were resisting the Industrial Revolution in England, all the way from the Luddites, to today, It is, first of all, let's take it on the chin. It is automation. People are going to have to change the way they do work today. And some of them may not be with the organization, some of them may be with other organizations. But ultimately, I think the way the conversation is phrased and I think it's, again here, it really falls to the vision of the CEO and the analytics leader, how you put it and how you think about it, envisaging that this is going to be the outcome and provisioning for it, because ultimately you are moving people up the value chain. Essentially, fundamentally, what going all the way back to the Luddites and the Industrial Revolution, the jobs that they did eventually were better jobs, where they were doing more of thinking, where it was higher up the hierarchy of thought overall, and putting it this way, making sure that this is understood and there is a comfort around it. First of all, in the analytics leader's mind, in the CEO's mind, in the CHRO's mind, that this is really what we are doing, and transmitting this to the organization, I think, is critical, and that's the answer really.
Awesome. I think, yeah, I think that's well said. Want to switch gears, Ambika, completely, and this is something which gets us into the latter phase of our discussion, factory of the future. I want to have you take a sneak peek a few years down the line. This whole aspect about intelligent design you talked about, addictive manufacturing, 3D printing, the whole aspect of a very federated manufacturing, personalization. Now, some of these trends today will become the norm, will get more mainstream when it comes to building that factory of the future. And you also mentioned as part of your earlier narrative about this AI influencing human decision. And CXOs, specifically in the manufacturing segment, will be able to take calls linked to how the factories are actually working. And maybe many of these calls will be on a preemptive basis before things happen. Tell us, how does this whole picture looks like? Because what I've built is just a facade. You may have to do the planning and maybe kind of take us into that, I would say, not I would say 2030, maybe 2025 picture of the factory of the future.
Yeah, so I think I think you got us off to a very good start in any case there, Samir. So I think number one, the customer is going to be a great deal closer. So the what the customer wants, experiences, feels. This is because if you look at it, this is in some way the fundamental revolution that AI actually brought into retail. It basically you collapse the barrier between the retailer and the customer. So this is the first and foremost thing. And again, data is the key. Having systems that actually do that, derive insights, etc. So the customer is going to come much closer to manufacturers. That's number one. Number two is that, as I said before, folks are going to be all across the value chain, all the way from the CXOs to the operators on the line, to the to the quality heads, to the process engineering heads. Everybody is essentially going to demand more proof before they actually, or demand more data, more insights before they actually make decisions. So they're going to heavily rely a great deal on data and systems to actually make their decisions, as opposed to gut or art and the sort of craft of it and so on. This is going to be a big shift. And the third, as I said before, I think there's going to be absolute laser focus on operational efficiencies in a way that because all of those they're going to get heavily disrupted. With all of these coming in, the stories become very clear as to where the efficiency leaks are happening. And once it becomes clear where the efficiency leaks are happening, there are certain organizations that are going to be ahead of others, and and of course yield is essentially what determines margins, and that's really what that makes a manufacturing company tick. And so again, there's going to be an increased pressure on that, and this is going to be felt all the way down to the operator level, who, as opposed to just cranking, operating a crank, cranking the shaft or whatever it is essentially going to be now thinking far more as to what is the impact of various actions that he or she is taking on the line. So this is really what I would say, 3 dimensions: customer, closer, yeah.
Wonderful. I think you painted a picture, Ambika, which to me I think is a very right picture from the start, I think, and maybe I'll take it up towards the end as part of summing it up. But I think this aspect about where things stand today on the manufacturing side, the whole inertia, reluctance to the stage where a lot of these decision making across the floor, the shop floor, will happen on the go. So that's something which it was really engrossing. Switching on, I want to.
So Samir, I think sorry to interrupt you there. See, I think if you think about factory of the future, for me, people like to think in terms of the outside manifestations, which may be robots here and there, and less people on the floor. See, but ultimately, the whole point is of the factory of the future is that it is actually going to be a change in the way that people think. The way that essentially they are doing their everyday job, and essentially incorporating or demanding more, before they make their decisions as part of their everyday job. And, that's really what I was getting at.
Yeah, so just linking to that, since you mentioned about robots, Are you saying that the factory of the future will have robots and humans working together, coexistence, or?
That's already the case. I think you're going to see an increase in that trend. I think there's more. So in the place where in the what I had spoken about earlier, where this sort of augmenting human intelligence part of it. There's a lot of interesting work there when robots and humans are sort of it's cobots in the sense that they're sort of working with each other and having a feedback loop with each other in specific tasks. This leads to some very interesting outcomes and a thought process. But sure, I mean, it's all a part of intelligent automation. You're going to actually see that trend going forward. But as I said, I think it's those are manifestations of the mind shift change that is the most critical.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let me take some questions, Ambika, because I think a lot of them have come in, and it's quite kind of streaming in and coaxing me to kind of now get into the Q&A part. And this is very pertinent. In fact, I want to take it as the first one. Make in India, digital India. There is an aspect today, the inflection point where we stand in India. We got to learn from our neighbor, without naming, of course, but it's obvious. But that particular country has had manufacturing supremacy, but the biggest rallying cry they had as part of their manufacturing supremacy is AI. Now, we stand at a junction where we are saying, okay, let's make these products, what we are importing, irrelevant. Let's do that in India, which is made in India. But also at the same time, do you believe all these manufacturing efficiencies, scale, automation needs to come in, but AI needs to be the fulcrum, or there's something else?
So, there is the most, I think, wonderful thing about, about AI as a technology is how democratic it has been. Really, if you go back to Andrew and his, Coursera, I think that just sort of sparked a thought process. It made things accessible, and how AI is essentially, it's entirely led by the open source community. This and so it's a completely democratic play, and it essentially is a huge opportunity, I think, for a company like India. And and the fact of the matter is that there is, I mean, you can take Vietnam as an example, actually, where if you want to look at a mass rise out of in terms of GDP, out of poverty, whatever measure you want to look at it, no country has done it without heavily strengthening their manufacturing sector. There is no example, there is no country, there's no economy that has actually made that divide. And India, unfortunately, we are the, I think, one of the first few examples of economies that have sort of gone about it the other way, where we essentially leapfrogged it. But manufacturing and building out manufacturing strength is going to be very, very hard to leapfrog. So it is something that essentially is critical to this entire journey. And absolutely, I see AI at the fulcrum of it, simply because, as I said earlier, for manufacturing, of course, there's an entire ecosystem. There is capital and policy and imports and government. All of these things are play into it. But ultimately, being able to produce better technologies, being able to produce higher quality manufactured goods, I think they're driving that at the core of it increasingly, both from an automation, quality, as well as R&D perspective. I would say is heavily going to be driven by AI in the coming years, and therefore, yes, absolutely, I see that.
Awesome, awesome. I think I want to take this question because I think this is one facet which we haven't touched upon. Technology sector today in India is considered to be very revered, sought after. Many policies have been designed to encourage technologies, companies, and startups to come in. And the biggest facet of, or rather ingredient of a technology company is skilling, reskilling, upskilling, spending enormous money in terms of ensuring that the employees in IT technology sectors are well taken care of on the skilling and learning side. That doesn't seem to be happening in terms of manufacturing, and specifically their ability, that workforce ability to get more accustomed to this newish technology. Any viewpoints, perspective over there, Ambika, where
Yeah, I mean,
this can be accelerated?
I live it every day, and it is something that I think is a part of my job that it truly gives me joy. It is really as I'm sure everybody on this forum knows and has experienced. I think the spirit of and the young people in this country, they're just born with expectations. They don't there it is a completely refreshing lack of mental boundaries. For example, if you look at they if you essentially I get pinged all the time. They want to come, they want to learn. And we spoke earlier about this fear that automation is essentially going to wipe out jobs and so on. And to me, this is the answer. I think we spoke about moving people up the value chain, and I think organizations like STL, I think we've completely open. So we actually have people. So what we do is essentially create project teams, and we have representatives in our project team, the projects that we run, that are analytics focused, that from R&D, from process, from operations. It's a contact sport. I mean, AI is a contact sport.
How receptive
very receptive. Very receptive, because the point is, everybody wants to learn. Everybody sees that there is a change, there is a different way of doing things, there's a cachet associated with this. And given the opportunity, of course, see, there are skeptics in adoption, but there are no skeptics in learning. So analytics is a contact sport. You have to get in there. You have to essentially, there has to be a scrum. There has to be, daily, a weekly, mashups between, all the various parts of the organization, touching the problem you're solving. And this is the education process. And changing the adoption, that's a different struggle. Learning, people are completely open, and this is the great strength I think that we have from a Make in India perspective. The technology is completely democratic. We have a very young workforce that is essentially extremely eager to look at it, and it would be up to us, I think, as leaders to sort of nurture that to the right place.
Great. I want to take the last one, and this is something which is specific to you. Chief Analytics Officer is something rare and often not kind of, let's say, mainstream kind of a title in India. What needs to be done to kind of propagate this title? I'm putting it directly.
Yeah, I think it's, I'm not sure whether, propagating the title in and of itself is a worthy endeavor.
How do the companies take Chief Analytics Officer more kind of seriously, and also in terms of many of the other companies adopting this?
I think what is a very, very worthwhile endeavor, and I think that's what you were pointing towards, indicating towards, Samir, is this thought process that there has to be the success of analytics and AI within an organization. It is heavily dependent upon how it is strategically placed, how it is strategically constructed, the entire journey, how it is actually put together for the organization. And I touched upon many points, during our conversation here: how you deal with the talent, how you deal with the rest of the organization, what is the tone of the organization that you set, how one prioritizes, how one deals with the data versus the problems, how one prioritizes all of these things. And it is in order to have the scale, to start small and scale big, to see the organization through that journey. I believe that this is a conversation that has to happen with the CEO. It has to happen with at the executive level. It has to be a sufficiently strategically empowered role, and it has to be something that is envisaged for the enterprise overall. And this has to be, and it is different from data. It is different from digital. The purpose of this role is ultimately business outcome. changing the way people, changing the culture of the organization, and producing better business outcomes. Very different from, from a digital transformation role, very different from a data officer role. And I think even peeling those apart, understanding that this analytics AI in and of itself has requires a very different kind of approach. If you look at it from a as part of digital, as part of data, you're really while it's part of the bigger picture, it requires a separate strategic focus. And I think that's really what this role is all about.
Awesome, Ambika. In the hindsight, I'm glad that we got you for this particular session because absolutely riveting, engrossing, and very engaging. I think the whole set of anecdotes, what you threw in the last 60 minutes, really were more kind of contextualized, gave our global participants a peep into what's happening today and what would happen in the time to come, specifically in a sector which is not often talked about, but very relevant. I mean, it contributes a large percentage to our GDPs. And given the focus and the kind of topical times, I think this session was wonderfully kind of, I would say, narrated by you. Thank you so much for your time. Wish you all the best. And thanks to all the global participants for a great set of questions. Thank you so much, Ambika. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir, for having me and letting me, carry on a topic that as you can see, I really feel passionate about. There's too less discussion about it. Thank you for giving me the forum to talk about it. Thanks to all the participants, for joining and hearing us out today. Absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you. Stay safe. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.